Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Because Football podcast. It is your host, Andrew, and today our fantastic guest, Matthew Eide of Newcastle, Delaware, not so far from myself in Philadelphia, the man behind Faraway Football. Matthew, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Yeah, man. I know we've exchanged messages, and I think I found I remember seeing your handle on Instagram. And I was like, that's a brilliant name, and just kind of following you and keeping in touch. And then it turns out we had some other similar connections, similars, whatever. I don't know exactly the web that kind of led to this, but glad we can finally make it happen. And I know that recently, just a few weeks ago, you got back from the mountainous nation of Bhutan. And so
Yeah.
I want to just, before we give any context, before it's like any explanation, we'll get to that in a second. But like, if someone had to say, hey, what was the biggest, like, where am I moment, like a real moment of whether it's clarity or surreal ism or whatever it is, like, what would be that one moment for you from that experience?
The first moment that I had, which actually came almost immediately in the trip, when I arrived in Bhutan, I had come from Kathmandu, Nepal, and I'd spent the night in Kathmandu. And Kathmandu is motorbikes everywhere. It is chaos. It is noise. It is just like life is happening seemingly in every dimension at all times. And it's amazing. It's amazing to be in that sort of experience and environment. But going from that to getting picked up from the airport in an electric car, I could hear the cicadas outside as we were driving along. Like
Wow.
it was such a quiet, calm country to go from, just like absolute chaos in Nepal to sort of peace. I mean, it sounds so cliche and be like, oh, I'm in a Buddhist country. It's so peaceful, but like truly, it was just like I've even in the U.S., I've never really been able to like drive and hear cicadas everywhere, even in like traffic, other cars driving by, just
Yeah, so it's like that
nature.
tranquility, right? Obviously, it's such
Yeah,
a difference from what you were, and then it's like, okay, I'm really here, and it's something different. Uh,
yeah.
and 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 for those again who don't know too much, like, could you give us a quick description of like what Bhutan is, where Bhutan is, and
Sure.
obviously why you found yourself there?
Sure. Bhutan is a very, very small country in what I call the foothills of the Himalayan mountains. It's squished between China and India, and it has fewer than about 800,000 people in it. Um, and for uh, American listeners, it's about the size of Northern Virginia. So if you know what the size of Virginia, or like the lump on top of Virginia, it's about that big. It's not big at all. Um, And I was there because I won a trip through, I think, our mutual friends, Icarus FC, Philadelphia based. Shout out Philadelphia.
Yep, I've
Um,
got the Because Football official kit is it's blurred out,
absolutely.
sponsored by Icarus. I do have some qualms with the process and how it was rigged, and the fact that you won it and I, as another contest entrant, did not win it. And I was watching the Twitter live or the X whatever live draw, and just immediately screamed corruption. But fair play to you. You were the biggest crook in this case, and you should be applauded for that. But
I
tell us, yeah, kind of what led into this opportunity.
so Icarus and Thimphu City are partners. Icarus produces their kits, Thimphu City's kits, and they had a contest that if you purchased one of their jerseys, because they just released their 2024 kits, you were entered into a sweepstakes to win a 7-day trip to Bhutan. I bought three shirts, so I had a little bit of an advantage, but I wanted all three because they're really, really cool shirts. So, yeah, I bought the home, away, and third for Thimphu City, and then basically just paced back and forth for the length of the contest of like, I need to go to Bhutan. Um, and my name got drawn. My number got pulled from the little box of ping pong balls. And you mentioned you watching the drawing live. I didn't record it because I actually came across you and I sort of uh you entered my orbit in that contest because I saw your reaction post of you going boo, and um,
Salty.
yeah, and uh, I was like, well, this guy is great. I love his stuff already because immediately I was like, I want to know if somebody's going to call me out for corruption. I'm just kidding. I didn't record anything because I was like, I'm not going to win. Uh, Nobody, like, it's just not going to happen. And the first person they called for like the fifth place prize was named Matthew. And I immediately was like, as soon as they said, the name, and then they said the last name, and I was like, oh, okay, well, that was it then. That was as close as I'll ever get is
That was
share
your
first.
shot. Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
But fate had other plans, man. That's
it
amazing. Now
did.
I'm happy you won it because obviously really fits into your passion for the game, your interests, and what it seems like Faraway Football is all about too. And obviously, still salty, and I'll be giving Johnny and Robbie and everybody who was involved in the process a hard time for eternity. But that was it was really awesome. And when you mentioned like for Thimphu City, right? You said you bought the home, the away, and the third kitchen, which they are beautiful. I'll link to the Icarus shop so everybody listening can check them out. But are there enough stadiums in Bhutan to actually play away?
Um, well, so most teams in Thimphu play in Changlimatan Stadium. Um, and I think now, I mean, there are I would say enough. I mean, any team that isn't based in Thimphu has a place to play. So there is, let's see, there's Paro, there's Dagana, there's a couple of teams that have stadiums. And I'll tell you, just from driving around the country a little bit, an away day is no laughing matter because there's even though it's a pretty short distance to drive, it can take a long time and it's a pretty harrowing experience given the roads and conditions. So any away day is far away enough. Even a home game at Cheglimitan can be
Fair. Yeah,
uh,
I was watching some of your stories and posts, and it was like, hairpin turns on the edge of mountains and then
yeah.
mist and fog on top of that. And yeah, it was like yeah,
Oh,
pretty impressive stuff.
honestly, that trip was for a trip down to the White-bellied Heron Conservation Center, which I'll talk about a little bit later because that's something really cool. But that was supposed to be like on Google Maps, it's about a 4-hour trip, and it took us maybe
What about
almost
yeah.
seven or eight, just one way. And it was raining, and there were rock slides and landslides, and it was just madness, man. It was like the scariest and coolest thing I've ever done.
You're like on the edge, right? It's like
Oh yeah,
another spectrum of the where am I moment of like, okay,
yeah.
this is legit. Like this is yeah, we're not playing around here. Yeah, it
Oh
looked
yeah.
amazing. And so with Thimphu City, could you tell us a little bit about the club? Obviously, other than being sponsored by Icarus, I don't really know too much, even from trying to follow along with with your stories and your adventure there. So between the club and then kind of like the general football scene in Bhutan in general.
Sure. Well, Thimphu City has been around for over 10 years. And they're one of the few clubs in Bhutan who have actually sustained for that long. A lot of clubs just come and go, and it is really hard to maintain a club in a environment like Bhutan just because of the expenses. It is owned by Hishi Shering, who's the coolest, most kindest, gentlest dude on the planet. I don't want to use the word like big dog because they're definitely one of the top teams in the country, but they're always sort of the bridesmaid and never the bride. They've won the league a couple of times. I think the latest one was in 2020. A team came onto the scene in 2019 named Paro FC, and they've sort of perennially won the league since then every single year. So it's always just been sort of like Thimphu versus Paro, which is exciting, but a little bit aggravating if you're a Thimphu City fan, just because they always get close, but they don't quite do it. But from an ethos perspective, I think it's a club that is unlike any club in the country, and maybe even the region, and maybe even the world, in that they are focused on connecting with their community, which a lot of clubs say they are, but they build futsal pitches for their youth academies. They donate a lot of money to causes. They have a support the monks cause, as well as I mentioned the white-bellied heron. Um, Peachy Sharing is a bird watcher and has his a bird watching tour company. So
Incredible.
he is a major conservationist. So his pride is nature and conservation, and really that's Bhutan in general is a really nature-driven country, but he is laser focused on really providing for others, and often says that the FC in Thimphu City FC doesn't stand for football club, but for charity. So it really is
Hmm.
like a
Cool.
it's a passion project. It's a football team, but it's also a driver for a lot of really, really good causes. The team itself is composed of a lot of national team players, but also national team players from like Timor-Leste and
Sorry, yeah. No, there's got to be. I was going to say there's got to be a Brazilian or two, if not on Timpu in the league. Like I feel like there's a Brazilian in every single league around the world. So there's got to be at
ah
least one Brazilian striker plying his trade, grafting away in the high altitude of the Himalayas.
I don't know that there used to be. They used to have a Brazilian on a couple of years ago, but there's a lot of Africans that play in the league as well. A lot of like Tongans, I think. I mean, there's Paro buys a lot of players sort of willy-nilly and actually signs them to like one match contracts and stuff like that. So it's kind of a weird from a culture shock perspective. Players are just sort of bought and sold and traded between clubs if there's opportunity to do so. Like some of the Timpu players will go and play for Paro in the continental matches that they're playing, and it's just sort of like, really? You just sort of pass players around like their
Interesting. So there's a
shirts?
bit
Yeah.
of a goodwill within the league and like just trying to
Oh,
kind of put on for the country as well. And one of the few things I know about Bhutan is it right that they're one of the maybe the only if not one of the few countries in the world that actually measures gross national happiness? Am I on the right track there?
yeah. So it is well going back, we'll talk about the GNH. You were talking about the sort of mindset of the country and the league because I think of just Buddhism in general. It is very much a like things happen for a reason. Don't worry about it. Chaos is the only truth. And just it felt so like a laissez-faire attitude toward players and teams. I mean, teams have support. They have local support and people love their team, but the moment that one team starts doing better, they might start drifting over to another team. They just sort of like, from my perspective, like a Western perspective, it's sort of like, what? This this
Like
should be much more
bandwagon.
defined.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's not
Yeah.
even bandwagon. It's just sort of like people want to, I don't even know. They just want to support. I guess it is bandwagon. Yeah, I was going to say they want to support the winner, but it's not
Or
like
just
Paro
see,
is
yeah, or
drawing
just see like
everybody.
decent football or yeah, has some
Yeah.
success, right?
Yeah. And so for gross national happiness, it's a strange marker. And a lot of people that talk to Bhutan or read about Bhutan, read about the gross national happiness thing, they've done away with the GDP, gross domestic product, and they've started using the marker of gross national happiness as what truly makes their country strong and powerful. It's a strange marker in that it's kind of an amorphous thing, whereas Westerners see it and they're like, oh, well, how do you measure happiness? Because you can't really put that down on a spreadsheet and
Right.
like what,
And
everybody
it
calls
can
it the
be quite a
happiest
personal
country.
thing too. Yeah.
Yeah. And for their credit, it's more of a like, what are we doing to make our people happy? And what are we doing to make sure that there's a comfort and a productivity with our citizens. And so it's kind of like an ethereal way of looking at stuff. Um, and definitely from a country perspective, it feels a little bit strange because when you're there, everybody's like nice and kind, and it is a wonderfully generous place. And it's like any country, it has social problems, it has economic problems, it has infrastructure problems, it has all these, it has everything a country has. People sort of think of it as a like mountainous Buddhist country where everybody's just, oh, gee, gross national happiness. Um, but they're also building this like enormous city for the future called the mindfulness city that will have its own currency based on like gold and crypto. And Bhutan actually has like the fourth largest holdings in the world of cryptocurrency. And
Wow.
It's it's
They're
all
prepared.
it's all been mined by their hydroelectric power, and I think they're the only country of the big four um, that have actually mined it all rather than like seizing it all. In whatever sort of governmental transactions happen that way. So the king and the parliament of Bhutan and the ethos of Bhutan are very much like gross national happiness, great, but also like super futuristic kind of tech bro mindset of crypto and just the future. It's a very strange
Interesting. Yeah. So
dichotomy of
it's
like,
interesting how they're looking to get some kind of like maybe you could say strategic advantage or just really some kind of it's almost like becoming another resource that isn't dependent, like it's irrelevant the fact that they're wedged in this tiny little nooks and crannies of the Himalayas between two of the world's greatest superpowers. It's like an opportunity they saw and are moving forward. It's pretty wild. I think right now from the story you've told of Bhutan, myself at least, or all our listeners are thinking cicadas, crypto, bandwagon
I
fans
know.
is kind of like Bhutan all in a nutshell. But I'm definitely going to do some research on that. That's one of the more interesting.
Yeah,
Love it.
it feels strange. So, if you're listening to this and you're sort of like, I don't have no idea what Bhutan is, like this guy's not telling the story correctly.
Might as well be like a planet in Star Wars at this point. Like it's
I mean,
bonkers.
it does feel like that, but it also like it is a country that has so much going on. There are so many stories, both just sort of socially, but also in football, and it's at an immense sort of crossroads of change because as a country, they only really have allowed tourists in since like the 70s, the mid 70s. They don't have a huge tourist infrastructure, even though tourism is the number two economic driver. So there's hydroelectric power and then there's tourism, and those are like the two things that give Bhutan money. The changes that are happening to tourist infrastructure, there's lots of money being poured into building up the country to be more, I'm going to use the word comfortable for, sort of a massive amount of people. It's a specific type of person because Bhutan is a rather expensive country to visit because the visa has a fee attached to it called the Sustainable Development Fee that
Okay.
charges the visa owner $100 a night that they're in the country. So a trip of any length can start becoming very expensive very quickly. And so
Mm-hmm.
usually the people who are visiting Bhutan are rather well off to begin with. So Bhutan's trying to, I think, cater toward that market of people. And they sort of realized, oh, these people want a certain comfort level or a certain amount of amenities, and we don't really provide that yet. So we need to start kicking it up a notch.
Gotcha.
Um, yeah, it is a wild place because it is a country that is moving forward very rapidly, and I think its citizens are sort of like, I don't really get what's going on here. They've spent so much time sort of living in this in the beautiful cloudy mountains and just like having a great time
Exactly.
existing,
Where
and then
time was almost stood still, and now it's
yeah,
like crypto is kind of one of the leading ways that our government is going. Yeah, it's a big difference.
yeah.
And I'm curious too, like on the football side, other than the gross national happiness, I remember watching an amazing documentary. I don't know if you can find it online these days. I imagine someone who's resourceful can, but it's called what, the other final, I think,
Oh
the other
yeah,
final,
yeah.
where it was Bhutan
Definitely on
and
YouTube.
Montserrat. So it was like, was it 98 or 2002? Maybe 2002, I
2002.
think.
Yeah,
And it was
2002.
basically brilliant idea. I think they were like Dutch filmmakers, something like that, decided, hey, while the actual World Cup is happening, why don't we do the other final? And at the time, Bhutan and Montserrat were the two lowest ranked FIFA countries in the world. And they somehow managed to arrange a match. And just like was there any mention made to that? Did it seem that that had made any kind of impact?
I chatted about it as I was planning the trip with Hishi, and from their perspective, it was sort of like, oh yeah, that was something that happened, and they didn't have this sort of earth-shattering effect. And maybe it did, but it was just sort of like, oh yeah, of course that happened. Like in talking about it, I was sort of like, oh, I want to meet this player and this player. I want to meet the players who scored the goals um, and played in the match. It'd be so cool to interview them. And one of them is a policeman now in the no eastern part of the country. Got my map turned around, and he was a little bit too far away to even consider talking to. And it was sort of like, Um, but literally at the moment that he and I were having that conversation, he was at a football match. The goalkeeper that played in that match for Bhutan was sitting behind him in the stands. So he sent me a video of the goalkeeper saying, "Hi, Matthew, can't wait to see you." It was like
So cool.
it was a perfect example of like
Star
how
power.
small and connected Bhutan is.
Yeah, or even just like it's just a really novel, awesome idea. And I wish that honestly it was like a thing that happened every 4 years. And the fact that they thought of it, documented, is just brilliant. So definitely recommend everybody to go check that on YouTube, apparently. But it's so cool that like you of all people kind of got this opportunity because it's not like you won this contest. So, oh, I'm going to go to Bhutan. That's kind of a really, kind of distant, almost like exotic sounding place that, you ask 1,000 people and nobody's really going to be able to point it out on a map. Even before that, you've been interested in these kind of niche football stories and cultures, and hence, faraway football. So, could you tell us a little bit more of the background of how faraway football got started and like how that
Sure.
kind of seamlessly came together with Bhutan and other experiences you've had?
I don't know if I would call it seamlessly coming together, but so Faraway Football is coming up on its 10-year anniversary. Oddly enough, that dawned on me.
Congrats, man.
Um,
That's awesome.
thank you. Um, and it really started um, because of my love of travel. Of course, it's obvious, but travel and overland travel specifically. So basically long road trips over rough terrain. The origin of it started because of Paul Watson, who is a host on the Sweeper Pod, which a lot of people know, but he's also written a book called Up
Mhm.
Pompeii. If you, I think it's actually on your one of your
Yep.
book clubs.
The Icarus guys recommended that to me, yeah, and I read that because of their recommendations, and pretty wild that Paul was the one who kind of delivered the good news to you of going to
Yeah.
go to Bhutan. Pretty cool that
So
came together.
Paul and I actually go back quite a ways, back to his days in owning a team in Mongolia. I was a very, very small part in that I was sort of helping with marketing the team by FC. But yeah, he and I go back quite a ways, and Faraway Football started because I wanted to drive from Vladivostok, Russia, to Lisbon, Portugal, and visit Bayangal FC in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia, and then along the way from Vladivostok to Lisbon, travel up into Siberia and go down into, Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, and even Afghanistan, uh, and then go back through Iran and, just sort of travel all the way through every little nook and cranny of the world that I could and exploring the teams that are along that route. It hasn't happened yet. Who knows if it will? My life has changed significantly, as has the world since then, but
Yeah,
it's still the
never know,
dream.
man.
I wanted to talk about teams in Mongolia or Bhutan or even India. I mean, even these countries that seem like they should have a huge following internationally that don't. So it's a lot of fun to really sort of dive into the rabbit hole and just explore the world and use a love of travel to explore the cultures, to explore the people, to explore the teams and really what makes each league in these different places special because they are truly a product of their location. It's a weird sort of pet project of mine that it's changing every day. It's a lot of fun, but it's also just like, what am I doing?
I get you 100%. But yeah, like I said, it's fun. So I think that's what kind of drives us in that passion. It's like it's something we enjoy doing, and you're making something like constructive, and we're able to connect over it. I feel
Yeah,
a similar way with because football. Like I can't go back to a specific moment where I was like, yeah, I'm going to start a podcast. Like I think it just happened, and I was like, all
yeah.
right, that's something I'm going to do to just be able to talk to people. So that's pretty cool. I'm curious, like, what is your first memory of the game? Either playing, watching, being a fan. Like, how far back would that go, and what was that experience like?
Honestly, it's not very far. Growing up, I had a Minnesota. I'm from Minnesota. Proud Minnesotan. Growing up, I had a Minnesota Strikers t-shirt, but like don't really have any memory of that. My
What league were they? I've actually never. I don't think I've ever heard of the Minnesota Strikers, and I'd say I'm relatively. Was that indoor soccer?
That
Was that
was
NASL?
indoor. So
Indoor. Okay.
yeah, it was the kicks were NASL. and that was I think before my time. That was in the 70s. And then
So
yeah,
you guys had
striker.
Minnesota Kicks too, because we had the Philadelphia Kicks that was our indoor team.
Yeah, they're probably the same team, honestly. I
Very
have to
cool.
do.
Well, we spelled it Kixx, so it was novel. How
Oh,
did you
oh
spell it?
yeah,
How did Minnesota? Just the
it
regular
was just
way.
like
See,
regular kicks.
weren't on that wave quite yet, but that's still cool.
The earliest memory I have is actually from like 2011, maybe even earlier than that, 2010. Man, I don't know. Um, but so growing up, I didn't really play soccer, um, and knew that it existed in Minnesota and was sort of like aware of the whatever local team because of the fluctuations of um, professional amateur soccer in the United States, as you know, is tentative. So I actually moved out to Washington, D.C. in 2009 and started, everybody was sort of like, "Oh, do you go to DC United games? Do you go to, these sort of matches at RFK?" And I was like, "I don't really know. I don't. What is that?" So I would go to DC United matches, instantly fell in love with it because it was so much faster than football and baseball and stuff. But the crowd at DC United matches at RFK Stadium was amazing. It was so amazing. My earliest memory is actually standing in the stadium while DC United was playing a friendly against Everton. Everton scored a goal, and of course the people that support Everton were there, and they were just going wild and standing and cheering and high-fiving and stuff. And I remember looking at them and being like, I hate you. Like I hated that the other team had scored and that their fans were happy. And
So you know it was real. You
I
knew
knew
you
it
had the
was real.
sickness.
At that point, I was just like, oh, I get this now. I understand. And very quickly I moved into like, I'm going to become a district ultra and I'm going to become, I'm going to make tifo for DC United and I'm going to just like really get into this. And it was just like my support just fell off of a cliff, and it was amazing. I met so many great people and had emotionality and the culture and the art that goes into soccer
Yeah.
and support
Yeah. The
and
expression,
yeah,
community.
yeah,
Yeah.
all of that. That's what really makes it.
100%. DC United at RFK were some of my first soccer memories, at least going to like it could be the first game I'd ever been to, potentially. Definitely in the top like two or three, because at the time Philadelphia did not have the Union. So
Hmm.
DC was one of the closest. With the name Faraway Football, it really rolls off the tongue. Why football and not soccer is, the other term that we are
Um,
allowed and apt to use as Americans.
I think just the alliteration of faraway football, it felt
Hell
better.
yeah. Yeah.
Um, if I was going to use soccer, it'd be like soccer somewhere, would be the name of it.
That's actually not too bad, to be fair.
But yeah, I think
That's a
most people,
mystique about it.
yeah, there's soccer somewhere. Oh, I'll have to write that down. Copyright. I don't know if that's some. Yeah, I think it was just sort of the alliteration of it, and I think because most of the world connects with or understands the word football from a marketing perspective, it was sort of like I'm going to go for this, and I use the words interchangeably. I'm one of those people who like
Yeah.
I'll just use whatever. If somebody wants to be like, "Oh, it's called football," like, okay, well, here, let me give you a history lesson. And it's like, it's
Yeah.
it's such a tiresome argument to me. That's like, who cares?
Exactly. It is wild though because I've gotten that so much. I also use the terms interchangeably, and I also know the history that like soccer was actually used much more commonly at the beginning, and then they went to football because they kind of want to distinguish themselves. At least that's kind of the general story I know, and how soccer comes from association football and distinguished itself from like rugby, which is called football. All that wild
Yeah.
stuff, and then you added the British Empire going all over the world, and it's a mix. And that's why in Australia they call it soccer too, and we have soccer in the U.S. and Canada soccer as well. So it's like, but it is such a. I think it's like one of the last vestiges of old world football identity to be like it's football, it's football.
That's
And I
fine
get
if
all
it
these
is.
comments in my YouTube videos. Yeah, I'm like, fair enough, but like also soccer, like you know what I mean. And to be fair, like I'm an American. If I say football, you might think I'm talking about American football. Like to be clear, it's whatever. But it's going to be good for the haters and trolls and that like that to keep on to try and keep Americans in our little box when it comes to the beautiful game. But yeah, it's kind of just like okay, all right,
Yeah. It's such a weird little thing. And I sort of laugh because, you mentioned American football. My logo, I should really do a write-up on like why it is. It's a triangle. It's a dashed line triangle for anybody who doesn't know, just, 90 degrees.
Yeah, yeah. Tell us
Um,
about that because I've seen it too. I'm like, it's kind of cool, but I'm like, I don't really know what's going on here. So give us the inside scoop.
well, it's supposed to emulate a passport stamp, but also the corner of a soccer pitch, the little tongue in cheek of 45 plus 45 equals 90, which is the two halves of a soccer match. So
Yeah,
it's
levels. Wow, there's levels to
yeah,
this.
that's really the
Everybody,
first time
pull
I've
up that
talked about it.
logo.
It's not anything special. It's just dash line and a triangle. But I always laugh that it sort of reminds me of those little paper footballs that you would kick with your fingers. And
Yeah,
so some people
100%.
might think that it's actually about the paper football, but nobody has ever mentioned that. So now maybe they will. But yeah, so
Faraway football for guys with really strong fingers.
yeah, they're still looking for that paper football from detention.
Yeah,
Who knows?
yeah, yeah. Awesome. So your dream project is the Vladivostok, which is that's like the easternmost point in, let's say,
Uh,
Eurasia, Russia, pretty much, or like kind of the middle of nowhere. Is that
it's
right?
really the most accessible point in Far East Russia. If I wanted to go easternmost, I could figure out how to get to the Diomedes Islands, which are just like next to the international date line.
Basically in Alaska at that point.
Basically, yeah. And I would love to go to like the very far eastern tip of Russia because, I mean, my God, like I've always wanted to go to like Kamchatka as well, just because it's such a strange, it's that little like,
I haven't heard of Contra. Is that like
it's a
I
little
imagine it's
lake
like
that sticks out
an island
above
or something.
Japan, from
Okay.
Russia. There's lots of volcanoes there. There is football in Kamchatka. I definitely want to go to a match because I think there's maybe Volcan FC. But yeah, I mean the dream is to basically have faraway football be about overlanding and football. Like I don't have a car or like a this sort of like kitted out truck or anything like that. I drive a Prius, but it's this sort of like exciting vision of what could be because there's football everywhere. It's
Absolutely.
opportunities to explore, which is the whole point of faraway football, explore football in faraway places.
There's really, I would say there's nothing that humans have created that can connect people in that way. And the only thing that's close is music. And you can say music similarly powerful in, as far as like the human emotions. Yeah, it's just like something that's really hard to describe, but how global it is and all the different ways it manifests itself depending on cultures and the resources they have and their history and things is just like unbelievable. And it's such a simple thing. You just need
Oh,
something
it's
round, something that you can kick without
yeah,
breaking your foot, and
yeah,
something to kick it towards maybe.
yeah. It's so much fun to connect with anybody from around the world, even on the smallest level. And the moment that that connection is made, you basically have like a friend for life, unless they're of course a blood rival and they're
100%.
like, get out of my
Exactly.
cab. It differs in music slightly in that everybody has an understanding of like a basic understanding of the game, and you don't have to describe like what the music sounds like or what
Sure.
uh how it makes you feel. Like everybody just knows right away, right? Like, oh, 22 dudes or women kicking a ball around and having a great time. That's it. Baseline, everybody gets it. And I think honestly, like as you mentioned before, your love of geography and the atlas thing. I also love geography and I love really getting in the weeds of geography. And it's so much fun to surprise people just because Americans generally are not known for being well versed in
100%. We can't
geography.
name a country outside.
Yeah.
Can't name a state. Most people
Name a
couldn't
country
name
that
four
starts with U.
states. Yeah,
Like we fail that one. But it's so much fun to just sort of surprise folks around the world, like, oh yeah, that's Central African Republic. Like, oh, yeah. Oh what? Like, you know where this is? Like, yeah, you don't. Like, they're great to watch. They've got a great team. Because I've done a lot of stuff with teams around the world, just in terms of like poking around and organizations around the world that are connected with football. It's just sort of planting these seeds that can grow. And even if I don't get to do the driving trip, it's been such a reward to be able to connect with people, to help these programs, to explore these programs, and to really help talk about the programs that are around the world. And I think that to me is really kind of the best part. If I ever do get to drive and I'm like broken down in the middle of Kazakhstan somewhere and it's just like I fucking hate this. Why did I do this? I have to just
cursing the
imagine.
heavens and
Yeah,
yourself.
just remember that like I
And the
wanted
one
this.
and this like nomadic do they have the I know Mongolia has like the guys that hunt with the falcons, right? The falconers, but I imagine Kazakhstan's got a strong tradition,
Oh
something
yeah.
of that as well. Or maybe like a yak
I think they
herder
use
stumbles upon your Prius and is like, what is going on here?
I think Kazakhstan have upped their game and they use like golden eagles or something like that. They use
Yeah,
big
yeah.
boys.
So the eagles
Carry me away, boys. Just cut all of that.
get it in post.
Oh God. It's so
All right,
embarrassing.
we're idiots. We don't know anything. Hopefully, you have
It's
a
all a
map with you when
ruse.
you're overlanding. Here's kind of one maybe last point we can talk about is we're talking about all these like really obscure like when we're talking about numbers, it's very little in terms of not only populations in some of these cases, but like the following. And as a product, as something to like rouse you out of your seat, you could say that beauty is in the eye of the beholder as far as being a football fan. But
Oh
like
yeah.
for example, I'm in Thailand now, and the Premier League is huge. So people would rather stay up all night, watch Premier League matches. And then probably the average attendance for a Thai league game is like 4,000 or something. When there's
Yeah.
millions of people watching and betting on the Premier League, Africa, it's similar. Much of Asia is like that. The US now, I mean, in the US, you use it like the Premier League gets better numbers than MLS, right? So it's
Yeah.
like, do you think there's any way to move against that, or what's a way that like local domestic leagues can become a little bit more significant to their own populations?
I mean, I do, and I think it all comes down to marketing, really. It's a mindset shift of the population of like, oh, I mean, I watch Premier League. I have a Premier League team that I support. I've actually like headed supporter clubs for that team. I think that people's attitudes toward what they're watching, I think people kind of need to get over themselves a little bit. Like these people that you're watching, no matter where they are professionals or semi-professionals or whatever league they're in, and they're working their butts off. And it's hard to even get to that point that you're playing in a match at any level of any significance. I would kill to be to be, a player on some league. A mindset shift into sort of supporting your local. I don't want to tell anybody like how to do that because there's a whole number of factors like ticket prices and distances from stadiums and transportation. All these sort of things can be hurdles, and I'm not going to tell somebody, oh, you're not a real fan, because I think it comes down to marketing, and I think it comes down to just the fact that like for a lot of these countries, the Premier League was their sort of first exposure to foreign football,
Hmm.
because of broadcasting. I think there's
Yeah,
so many Arsenal supporters in Africa, because Africa were the first, or I'm sorry, Arsenal were the first club to like broadcast their matches on the continent.
got it.
And so a lot of people just started watching Arsenal. And of course, Arsenal, when they were doing that, were amazing and they had amazing players and were
Exactly. It
just
usually
explosive.
coincides with success.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right. From what I have experienced watching football in places ranging from, lower league US to Seychelles to Bhutan, is it can be a lot of fun no matter where you are. Just it's what it is, It sounds like such a cop out, but like go and support your local and have fun, make some friends, make it a thing. And like even God, DC United was terrible. I had season tickets and they won 3 matches a season. Like there was a
oof,
historically
yeah,
worst season in MLS history. And that was like my favorite season to watch of all time. Because the people that showed up to the matches, sickos. Like it was like amazing to just hang out with these absolute weirdos watching terrible football. And I have really happy memories from that. So if the quality sucks, get better quality people around you. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is.
yeah. I think it's a fair point. I think it's like obviously there is like a certain level of what you can call the product that you're watching and the quality, but like there's a drama to be found. Like you can, it's funny. It's like it's almost like you say that to the millions of youth soccer parents in the country right now who are literally like shitting themselves on the sidelines every
Yeah.
Saturday afternoon watching their 9-year-old, and
Yeah.
then it's like, I don't. So what is that like? Is it their fault? No, it's because it means something some way, and it's a relationship, it's a community thing, and I think you make a good point with that. Like, but that also requires the in-person match day experience that
Well,
some people might not be able to, as you alluded to get to, but also like might not be ours to
yeah.
do.
Well,
And in that case, and it's kind of a moot point anyway.
it goes hand in hand. It's like if the clubs don't have butts in the seats, they don't make money. They can't buy better players. They can't field a better product, and their team suffers. and isn't good, and then everyone's like, oh, this team's not good, and then they don't go to the match, and then it's just sort of this self-fulfilling prophecy of like, oh, well, this is terrible. Like, well, yeah, it's terrible because financially, this is a huge, huge endeavor, club as a whole, from the owner on down to the players. It's sorry to say, but like it really does come down to money and marketing, where it's like if you build it, they will come, and if they keep coming, it will get better. So find what makes it special to you, have fun with what is near you. And of course, like support, like I support so many different clubs in so many different countries in so many different ways. I have my clubs and I love them to death. I think everybody else can too, but like, go to your local matches and have fun.
Even if your local is 9 million miles away in Bhutan.
Well, you can watch them on YouTube if they're you know,
Yeah,
in Bhutan.
there you
It's
go.
incredibly easy to watch, especially on the East Coast because it's like 7 o'clock in the morning, 8 o'clock in the morning for matches. So,
All right, man. Well, Matthew, this has been awesome. The way I like to end every episode, I'm really excited to hear your answer here. I'm building you up. Is could you
oh yeah.
finish the sentence because football?
Oh, I don't know that I can. Can I finish the sentence? Now I'm really pressured. I think it's goodness gracious. Because football exists. I think that's what I would say. I know that that sounds like such a weird thing, but it's because it exists. People's lives have really changed for better or for worse. Um, so yeah, because football exists. It
Cool.
sounds like such a
Really
weird
sweet, man.
like I
Yeah.
yeah, I think it really like because it exists. I mean, my life has changed because of it in a lot of different ways. So, I'd love to hear how other people's have changed.
Yeah. Hey man, that's kind of the stories that we like to tell here, and it's always a real joy and an honor and a pleasure for me to do so. So I appreciate you sharing your story with us, not only of Baton, but dreams of future overlanding in your Prius through the
Oh, I don't
golden
know if
eagle
it
hunting fields of Kazakhstan, and wherever you might end up, whether it's Newcastle, Delaware, or Vladivostok, Russia. We look forward to following your travels, man. And I got to say too, before we end up, you have a fantastic voice for I'm waiting you to like jump on the next like Disney movie, like you got Lion King 3. I could see you being like a really like personable elephant or some shit like that.
a personable
Potential side
elephant.
hustle. Potential side hustle. You want to
Uh,
get some of that cash
yeah,
for your overlanding travels, could be voice
Disney, if you're
actor for
listening.
sure, man. Yeah.
Wow. I'll have to look into that. Growing up, I had a Minnesota accent and I still sort of do. So I always thought I sounded like I was in
It's
the movie
endearing.
Fargo.
Yeah.
Personable
It's endearing.
elephant. That's going in the bio.
Yeah.
Well, if
There
anybody
you go.
does want to listen to my voice, I do have a podcast. I have one whole episode that I've produced. It's called Unrecognized, and it's about football in unrecognized countries. So check it out. I have one episode.
Very cool. Awesome. And it's like, your friendly Disney sidekick talking to you the whole time
Yeah, just
about
imagine it's an elephant
sport
talking about
football.
football.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And very cool. So
Well, thank you.
awesome, man. No, I appreciate it, Matthew. It was brilliant and had a great time. I'm sure you've got a lot more stories. You do have a lot more stories about
I
Bhutan.
do.
So like, I know you've been on a lot of other podcasts. I want to put this plug in. The man is a legend, published author in 442. So make sure you get the latest episode or the latest edition rather, and catch his
Yeah, pick it
article
up.
about Bhutan. Matthew is awesome, man. I appreciate it. Everybody listening, watching, thanks for hanging with us through this hour of nonsense and really obscure places. And don't steal the name Soccer Somewhere because we've got the copyright coming for that. But thank you for listening and watching, and we'll see you guys on the next episode. Peace.
Bye.